and give a round of applause to our first storyteller, Simon.
Okay, thanks. I think this is good. Thanks. In the Tran family household, there's a photo I remember seeing growing up. It's a faded photo of 4 kids and a mother on a beach. There's a palpable energy in the photo. Everyone is smiling in such a way you can only smile back. The kids are young and skinny. The girls are wearing big floppy hats. Everyone is wearing short sleeve shirts but long dark pants. There's a girl to the far left who always catches my eye. She by far has the biggest smile, as if the photo captured the exact moment she fell into laughter. All I knew growing up was that my dad and mom were from Vietnam and that they came to the States when they were young. But what was I missing? The true stories that are so important to my family's history but were forgotten. But why? Maybe because of the constant pressure of assimilation. Maybe because of the trauma. Maybe because these life events were so insurmountable and too hard to reconcile that it was almost easier to forget than to value remembering. But why wasn't I curious? Maybe because Vietnamese culture doesn't really have room for people to be vulnerable. Maybe because I recognized at an early age that most of the white kids at school already saw me as different. Why would I have a desire to embrace the obvious reason why I stuck out? My parents still have an accent, and I feared that that accent would interfere with my perfect English. But it wasn't until junior year of college that it all changed. I was in a class that dived into the political violence and trauma that occurred in Peru in the 1980s. As I read stories and watched interviews of people grieving the loss of their family members who had been killed or taken away, I couldn't help but realize how interconnected my stories were to theirs. Hi, Grandpa. It's Simon. Hey, I have a project for school I need your help on. Yes, it's about when you came to Vietnam. It shouldn't take more than an hour. Are you sure? Okay. I'll meet you in Chinatown this Saturday. No, my mom can't make it. It'll just be us. I met my grandfather at a coffee shop in the Chinatown in Seattle. We sat down, I pressed record on my phone, and without any cue, my grandfather recounted his story without stopping for almost 90 minutes. It was as if this memory had just happened. There was a vividness in the way he told the story, as if he had been thinking about this moment every day for the last 45 years. Basically, in a nutshell, it was 3 days before the fall of Saigon. What are you doing here? My grandfather had been sitting in a coffee shop and he ran into an old friend, and his friend warned him that he needed to leave. You see, my grandfather was in the Democratic Army and had worked for an American company. He would have been killed. So that night, my grandfather had to talk with my grandmother. We need to leave tomorrow. Don't tell anyone except your mom. He told the kids, pack your bags, but only one small suitcase. That's all they're allowed. So they went in the morning to the airport, and they saw that there were lines of people, and they were waiting for hours and hours and hours, as if everyone in Saigon was thinking the same thing. And in the airport, they were waiting for hours and hours and hours. My grandfather was losing hope, but he saw an American soldier, and because my grandfather knew English, he said, "Sir, my wife is tired and my kids are sick. Is there anything that you can do?" 15 minutes later, they were on a plane on their way to the States. So after I interviewed my grandfather, I said I needed to interview my parents. So I did. I went home and I visited my mom and my dad, and I interviewed my mom first. My mom was 14 years old, and she was excited for this adventure. See, she had never left Vietnam before. In fact, her only goal in life was to never have to kill a chicken for dinner. My mom just remembers going to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and having to sum up the courage to answer the phones just in the event that someone called to sponsor my mom's family. She was sponsored by a family all the way in Spokane, Washington, and at the age of 14 was taking English classes by the sweetest woman she has ever met. With my father, he was 19 years old, and it was a last-minute decision. My great aunt worked at the airport, and somehow, because of the chaos that was happening before the fall of Saigon, no one was paying attention, and so she used her Jeep that had security clearance so that she could bring people in and out of the airport without any question. So that's how my family got out. They were stationed in Camp Pendleton, California, which is where a lot of my family still lives. My father was relocated to Olympia, Washington, where he went to school, and as a result, that is where I grew up. Something I should mention is that when I interviewed my father, my mother snuck into the room because I learned later on that my mother had never heard my father's story. My father never wanted to tell her, but you think that was something that they shared, but he never wanted to put that burden on her. And it showed me just how hard it was for them. And I never thought of it that way. To be separated from your culture and your life in a matter of moments. And I got so frustrated growing up that every single time we saw a Vietnamese person on the street, my parents would stop to talk to them, even though they didn't know them. But it's because they longed to connect with someone who was like them, because they had nothing. You remember that picture I mentioned at the beginning? The one of the family on the beach? My grandfather said, when we arrived to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, I told everyone, okay, get out everything that you packed from those suitcases. Everyone unzipped their small suitcases, showing my grandfather what clothes they had and what clothes they needed for the winter. But when he came to my aunt, he stopped. Mi Fung, why did you not bring any clothes? My aunt takes out what she has in her suitcase. Instead of clothes, she holds up a stack of photos, our family photos, more valuable than anything else in the world. Thank you.